1867 Sports Show coming at you for episode number 15, and we are bringing in a special guest today. We figured we had to even out the beast to the beauty on the show here, so we are bringing in TSN Radio's host of She's Got Game, Michaela Schreiter. Michaela, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's not specified which side of that I'm on, so
I,
hey, it could go either way.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think that's a shot at me, but we'll
A
we'll
thinly
basically...
veiled shot at Big Kyle there, but
What's going on, Michaela?
Oh, thank you so much for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, it is kind of your Super Bowl of sporting events over the last 72 hours. We got pretty much pick of the litter. You got PWHL is coming back into action down the home stretch, Canada, USA, gold medal, overtime game, WNBA draft. Like, first of all, let's just set a baseline here. How are your nerves after the 6-5 OT thriller? Because anyone who follows you on Twitter knows that you live vicariously through Team Canada at times.
I do, much to my own chagrin. And yeah, somehow even the preliminary round game nearly killed me. So I don't know how I got through the 6-5 win, thank God, on Sunday. It was a lot of frantically texting Vanessa, my co-host, and using her as a therapist. So that helped. But it was so back and forth. 1 minute US is winning, the next minute Canada's winning, and then back and forth, back and forth. So like, no lead felt good or safe. Even in overtime, I was like, is there a way they could still come back? So yeah, my nerves have calmed down a little bit. But it has been between Canada and the US in hockey, and then Canada and the US in soccer last week. It's just been a whirlwind of stress for the last week or so. I chose this. I chose to be a sports fan. I did this to myself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe even a good place to start here, right, is just the fact that there's a lot of discourse going on right now about, oh, women's sports are having a moment right now and they're finally getting their shine and this, that, the other. But like, as someone who has been following a wide variety of women's sports leagues for most of your life here, maybe you can even just shine a little light on what the biggest change is in terms of media coverage, as opposed to having to find these weird, Uzbekistani illegal streams of these games to, hey, they're actually on CBS, NBC, CBC, and oh, weird, we've got 18.7 million viewers tuning in when we actually put it on cable. Like, what has that kind of journey just even been like in terms of seeing the growth of women's sports on the media side of things over the last 2 years or so?
Yeah, well, and that's pretty much exactly it. Every time we talk about this, we talk about the fact that women's sports, whether it's basketball, hockey, or soccer, or what have you, has always been good. It's always been entertaining. We've just been shouting from the rooftops for so long that, like, you need to put it on TV. And when you put it on TV, you need to promote it and you need to cover it the same way you do men's sports, right? And I think what's happening is we're seeing that slowly start to happen. Not just that they're on TV, but there's a panel of experts discussing it in between periods or halves or whatever, or there's an hour pregame show. There's ads for it. All these things that are very normal in sports coverage are slowly starting to happen in women's sports. And I think with that investment in the coverage of the game comes viewership. And now we're seeing that, which is awesome, because we've been saying for so long, put it on TV and people will watch. And now it's happening, which is wonderful. And it's wild to think. I think I talked about this with you, Kyle, at some point, but it was 3 years ago that Sedona Prince shared the TikTok of the lack of a weight room in the women's college basketball national championship tournament. And here we are 3 years later. We can call it March Madness. ESPN has actually started airing the games and promoting the games and bringing experts in to cover it. And lo and behold, it's the most watched basketball event since 2019. So yeah, it's like, it's great to see. I try not to get too frustrated about the fact that, like, where was this for a long time? ESPN has had these rights for a very long time, but I'll take, I'm just happy that people are watching, people have access to it, and people are enjoying it, because it's a ton of fun, and it's been so amazing to see.
Yeah. And going back to the Canada US thing, you're mentioning, a ton of fun while also having the stress involved with it. These games always seem to be back and forth. these are the two clear best teams in the world, whether they're like at the Olympics, World Championships, exhibition games, what have you. So, obviously these are the kind of games that draw in more attention, right? You get these 6-5 games. So now you're getting this increased media exposure, and having games like this will just increase it even more because people are now going to tune in and say, oh, I'm going to text so-and-so to say, you got to check out this game if you're not watching it already. But, in your mind, I'm looking at, the overall consensus of, where Team Canada is right now. And they've got a pretty special player with Marie-Philippe Poulin. And she didn't score a goal the entire tournament until the gold medal game where she scored 2. She is arguably the best big goal or big game goal scorer in Canadian hockey, let alone men or women. So in your mind, are we seeing Marie-Philippe Poulin really kind of take over that moniker of being the top female hockey player of all time, overtaking the likes of maybe a Haley Wickenheiser? Or is she not on that level just yet? Maybe needs a little bit more of a runway.
Oh, that's such a tough question because I love
Coming out
Haley
of the gate
Wickenheiser
with
so
Sophie's
much.
choice here for you.
Yeah, I don't have children, but I imagine this is like choosing your favorite child. It's it's so hard not to say yeah, because since 2010, when she first kind of burst onto the scene, for lack of a better phrase, she was 18 years old and scored the only 2 goals in the gold medal game on home soil in Vancouver to help Canada win gold. And it's like that wasn't even the most clutch thing she's done.
Yeah.
Like it
No.
only got better from there. And yeah, she shows up in big moments. And what I love about Marie-Philippe Poulin so much is that she shows up in these big moments, yes, but she will give the spotlight to her teammates, like first and foremost all the time. And she's such a quintessential Canadian captain that way.
Yeah.
You think of Christine Sinclair, very similar vibe, Haley Wickenheiser, like all of our Canadian leaders in sports tend to have that like very humble attitude. And she certainly personifies that. And sometimes I think that's why maybe we don't see her score a ton in the preliminary round because she's focusing on making her teammates better. And then the gold medal game comes and she's like, okay, never mind, I got this. It's hard not to say like, yeah, she's absolutely one of the greatest Canadian hockey players of all time. She's in conversation for it, gun to my head, who's the best. It's hard not to deny what she's done when you've scored that many game-winning goals in a gold medal game, be it in the World Championships or the Olympics. Yeah, how do you not put her up there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I think is so great about the PWHL is like we were getting dangerously close to not being able to watch Marie-Philippe Poulin in her prime, in her career, right? Like she's in her early 30s now, not like I'm 34. So like that to me is a spring chicken. But the way that athletes go, you never know how much longer they have. And it would have been such a tragedy if we didn't get to see her play professional hockey. And now we do. And it's so great. So that was my very non-answer answer of I can't decide.
Well, you know what? It was funny. I was kind of expecting, to take the democratic way of, kind of giving both of them their flowers at the same time. But yeah, don't worry. We're not going to tell either or if you pick one or the other. So,
Thank you so much.
Yeah. It's not a congressional hearing. Well, obviously, the Canada-US rivalry is one, the premier rivalry in women's hockey right now and has been for the better part of decades plus, right? But it's amazing that it's still in such a healthy spot in terms of you look at kind of the life cycle of these programs where there's ebbs and flows. And, you look at kind of Team USA basketball on the men's side right now, they're stuck in this weird, like, hey, LeBron and Steph and them, they still want to play, but, are they really still the best of the best that we want to be sending to the Olympics? There's arguments to be made there. But for whatever reason, Canada and the US have just been at the absolute pinnacle for such a long time. And you look at games like this where 6-5 overtime victory, their rivalry series, US runs out to a 3-0 series lead, and then Canada wins 4 straight, right? So like the margin is just so thin between those two. But with advents of things like the PWHL and more international women starting to actually get access to these professional leagues and year-round training and all of that, how would you kind of rate the gap between where Canada and the US is right now versus that kind of next glut of European countries and whatnot who are slowly coming up throughout the ranks on the international scene. Is it still huge, or are we starting to see more of a closing of that chasm, so to speak?
Yeah, it's definitely getting smaller. I think I always use the example of the 2019 World Championships, which was 5 years ago now. It feels wild, but Finland beat Canada in the semis and went on to the gold medal game, and then, in my opinion, won the gold medal, but it was called back because of a stupid goalie interference call. But that was a moment where we were all like, whoa, okay, like Finland's here. And Finland's kind of been solid in that third place for such a long time. It felt like they were finally taking this big step forward. And since then we maybe haven't seen them overtake Canada and the US in the semis as much, but like they're still giving them a run for their money. Like the semis are not a guarantee with Canada and the US. I think Canada went to overtime against Sweden in the last World Championships in the semis. So it feels like that gap is closing, and slowly but surely. Like I feel like it's something that we've waited for a long time. And in Torino in 2006, it felt like Sweden was closing that gap, and then their program just completely fell apart. They lost all investment, and they lost all that traction that they had gained. But what I think one of the huge benefits of the PWHL, not only does it give some of the best Canadian and American players a place to play professionally and to get better themselves, but you've got so many international players joining this league where they have a profession, like an environment to play in where they are treated professionally. They can focus solely on their game. It grows the sport of hockey in their respective countries, which hopefully sends a message to their governing body to invest in the women's program. That's such a huge issue in most of these cases. It's just that there's great hockey players in these countries, but their programs, especially on the women's side, do not provide the investment needed to grow these athletes. But now they could potentially have a professional environment where they can grow their skills, the sport can grow itself, and then hopefully we see that investment come in. So I feel like that would be a longer term thing, but I do like to think that as the league grows, as more roster spots become available, we start to see that growth of the game internationally.
Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of a nice segue into our next topic of PWHL
Yeah.
here, where, we're now coming back from kind of this international break here, and every team has 5 games left, right? So we're really in the home stretch, and you take a look at the standings. There's a lot that can happen, especially with the 3-point kind of swings that can happen with victories and whatnot. There's some ground that can really be made up quickly. So, as you're kind of looking at how the schedule maps out, 5 games left for everyone. Are you kind of thinking, all right, the 4 that are in there right now, they're probably going to be the 4 that ultimately end up making the playoffs? Or just how the schedule lined up, do you think we could see a late season push from a 5th or 6th place team and maybe bump Ottawa from that final spot in the playoffs?
Yeah, it's such a difficult question because of that 3-point game system. It's really easy to make up traction. It's really easy to make up points, and it's just as easy to fall as a result because the teams below you can do that. So we saw Ottawa kind of do that the last couple of games before the break. They put a bit of a gap between them and Boston with 5 points, but that 5 points can be eliminated in 2 games, right? So it's so hard to say. And with a team like Boston, I went on record and said that I thought they were the best team in the league at the beginning of the season, and they're now firmly out of a playoff spot. But there was a reason they were so hyped going into the season. They have some of the best players in the world. They have Hillary Knight, who just herself had a great World Championship tournament, who hasn't really had a great season in Boston, got off to a really slow start. Does that, light a fire under her and she comes back super hot and goes on a tear? It's hard to say. And Ottawa was on a great run, like I said, but before going into the break. Does the break then cause them to lose some momentum? It's so, one of the beautiful things about this league is it's so hard to predict. But like I'm obviously I'm very biased. I'm based here in Ottawa. I'm really hoping Ottawa holds on to that playoff spot. Right now, if the playoffs were to start today, they're going to be potentially a team that a Toronto in first place could choose to play in the playoffs, which I think is really exciting. So I'm really hoping, regardless of how the actual playoff matchups line up, I'm really hoping Ottawa can squeak into the playoffs. They've got such a great fan base at home. This fan base loves this team. They show up for this team every single game, and I would love to see playoff hockey at TD Place for PWHL Ottawa. So I'm hoping that they hold on to it, but in this league, you really never know.
Well, it won't be playoff hockey at the CTC. That's for friggin' sure.
That is for damn sure.
But you mentioned so much can change in the next little bit, but I'm looking at the parity across the league this year. And I mean, yes, you've got the top three that are kind of locked and loaded as, their playoff teams, no questions asked. But if you look at the grand scope of it, out of the 6 teams that are playing, only 2 of them have a plus goals for against, right? So, I mean, you think about that. Montreal obviously got a lot of the early jump on teams. I think they got off to the hot start and they kind of tapered off since then. But out of the 4 playoff teams that are there, I would say Toronto and Minnesota have kind of been that steady presence along the way, whereas all the other 4 are kind of just been up and down like that roller coaster, right? So this is kind of presents something unique that you don't see in sport in general, let alone a first year sport. But this is going to present a lot of interesting scenarios, down the stretch. But again, you look at these top teams and, you look at the top goal scorers, top point getters across the league, and they're all part of these top 2, top 3 teams, right? I mean, I look at Toronto, you've got a great combination with Natalie Spooner and Sarah Nurse. You're not going to get a better 1-2 combination than that. You've got obviously Montreal with, the aforementioned Marie-Philippe Poulin. We all know her penchant for, bringing up her game when it comes to, championship chases. And then, even a team like Ottawa, I mean, got off to a little bit of a slower start. They have more of a well-balanced record, but over the course of the last month or 2, you're seeing one of these international, players kind of step up and take the reins as being the leader of this team with Katerina Marazova. So when I look at all of these different scenarios that could play out, I mean, you and Kyle have both said it. This is just setting up for such exciting hockey, not even playoff hockey, just exciting, last month and a half of the season.
Absolutely. Like you look at the scenarios that could play out over the next 5 games for each team, and there's so many different ways this could go. Even like Montreal in 3rd place right now, there's only a 4-point gap between them and Montreal and Ottawa. Like with the 3-point system, that can be erased really quickly. Like you just never know. And you're right. The lead up to the playoffs is sometimes just as exciting as the playoffs themselves when you have these really tight races. And when you've got a league in its first year with just 6 teams and so many amazing athletes, the parity is going to be really, really strong because there's only so many roster spots. That's been one of the funner things of this league this year. To use Toronto as an example, they're firmly in first place. They are without a question the best team in the league right now, and yet Ottawa has had their number all season, which is super fun if you're an Ottawa fan. They ended the longest winning streak in Toronto sports. They've beaten them more times than Toronto has beaten them, and you wouldn't suspect it, given their place in the standings. So it's been a lot of fun to watch, and I think as the league expands, we'll probably see that start to change. But, in the meantime, we can just enjoy, no matter what, almost every single game you're going to get like just incredibly high level hockey.
Yeah. And you look at the teams that are part of this kind of inaugural class that have come in here in year 1. Obviously, it takes a little bit of familiarity playing against one another again and again and again. And oftentimes it even takes a playoff series before you really see these rivalries start to develop. But if you were to kind of look across the landscape of the league right now, like what jumps out to you as of today, like the number 1 rivalry in the PWHL between the franchises there?
That's such a good question. It's hard for me not to pick Ottawa because I've been to every home game and I'm just exposed to them more because I'm here. But the Toronto Montreal rivalry is always going to be a strong one in sports, and the league has really played into that with having the battle on Bay Street, and they're both either have played or are going to play games against each other in NHL arenas, so they're using that existing rivalry to build one here. And I think that naturally is going to take shape with their respective fan bases. And I remember even the game that they played in Toronto at the Scotiabank Arena, was, had posed a question on Twitter to PWHL Ottawa fans of like, who are you cheering for in this game? And the resounding answer was neither. So even, with Ottawa's firmly there in this kind of like trio city rivalry. So I think PWHL Ottawa has started to develop a pretty strong rivalry with Montreal and with Toronto. That's just naturally kind of always going to be there. And then I think Boston and New York, similar thing, right? These two cities hate each other when it comes to every sport. So you could ask someone on the streets of New York who doesn't follow PWHL at all, their thoughts on PWHL Boston, and it probably wouldn't go too well, right? Like no matter what, these cities are always going to hate each other. And I love that. So I think we've seen some of those natural rivalries start to take shape, and it's going to, I think one of the things I love so much about the playoff format is that it really has the potential to build those rivalries. So like if you're a team that's picked by the number one team to play in the first round, they picked you because they think they can beat you. Imagine what happens when you beat them, and how that can fuel rivalries. So I think we've seen a lot of the city rivalries play out the way we expected. I think the playoffs are going to really push it to that next level.
Yeah. And I mean, you got all these rivalries. Poor little Minnesota just sitting there all by themselves. They're praying for a team in the Canadian Prairies or in Chicago to come in, so that way they can kind of join the rivalry party too. But 100%, I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, and that brings up, the point that Kyle and I were discussing a few episodes prior, as far as, trying to keep this momentum going and what are kind of the next steps for this league.
Now I'll preface this by saying I'm more of a big thinker than Kyle is. I like to think big picture. Kyle's the baby step type of guy.
Yeah. But like in your mind, how soon is too soon to talk expansion? Like if you had a magic wand and there was a will from, a deep-pocketed owner for next season, like, are you looking at 2025 as potentially, launching a Chicago team or somewhere else? Or are you looking to really solidify what you've already got with the 6 teams that are in the league, let that grow organically for maybe a year or two, and then you kind of open up the floodgates to some more teams joining? Like, where do you fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, it's tough because I think this league in terms of success has exceeded expectations for some people. I like, not to be one of those people, but like Vanessa and I talk about this on the show all the time, but like, we're not surprised that these teams in this league have seen so much success because we've been all waiting for a women's hockey league for so long. It just felt like the floodgates opened, and now of course we were going to see this level of success because we've been waiting for it for so long. And I think even some of these individual teams have exceeded their own expectations in terms of attendance. Like, Toronto's playing in a 2,500 capacity arena, which they've already outgrown, and we're in year 1. So normally my answer would be, probably take a cautious approach, and you want to do it right. You don't necessarily want to do it fast, but given how much these teams have already kind of outgrown their own success, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to start talking about it sooner rather than later. You look at this. Yes, I'm not alone, Kyle. You look at the 6 teams, like, you can think of so many markets that naturally could have a hockey team tomorrow. Like Chicago is one that definitely comes to mind. Detroit, same thing. They've obviously started testing the waters and going to some of these places and playing in the NHL arenas there. I think you could very easily add 2 teams to this league next year, and it wouldn't even be an issue.
Weird. Chicago and Detroit. It sounds like what I said. Big Kyle came off the top ropes with, let's get one in Stockholm, Sweden.
Let's go.
If you want to grow the game internationally, you got to take the big step. But I was also going to say, too, there is an opening down in Phoenix right now for a hockey team. So
true.
I mean, that void can be filled pretty easily, much to Kyle's enjoyment, as he loves desert hockey.
Well, Salt Lake City technically is a geographic desert. That's a conversation for another show there. But I mean, you've hit on so many like big moments there throughout the season. Obviously, just getting all the talent from, kind of these fractured leagues over the years, all under one banner, one roof, has been huge. Moving from kind of these smaller venues to these larger scale, like, oh, okay, Ottawa's going to set the record, and then Minnesota's going to break that, and then Toronto's going to break that, and it's just this game of one-upsmanship. That's been massive as well too. Now you've got this parity and kind of coming down the stretch where anything can happen over these final 5 games. There's no true doormat of the league, and no one has clinched at this point either, right? So if you're going to kind of just cherry pick or power rank a few moments from the season that have stood out to you as kind of the most impactful, like what jumps out at you as being those big, like you look back on it and go, wow, moments from this first season in the PWHL?
Oh man, so many. Yeah, it's hard not to say some of those record-breaking crowds, like whether it was Minnesota or the Toronto-Montreal game in Scotiabank Arena, that in particular really stood out. Like they sold out Scotiabank Arena in a matter of minutes.
Yeah.
And seeing that crowd was really, really cool. I think some of the firsts throughout the early days of the league, like being at Ottawa's home opener and watching Haley Skamura score the first ever goal in PWHL history, PWHL Ottawa history, like that crowd, that like I'll never forget that. That was so cool. Watching the first game on New Year's Day, and like how we all just like collectively, whether you were at the game or laying on your couch nursing the New Year's Eve hangover, like we all just collectively enjoyed that together. And God, there's been so many. It's also for me the little inside jokes or the little like side jokes that have come out of a lot of these games, like little moments that these teams are so good on social media. Their social media games are really, really strong. And you've seen like them start to develop relationships with fans. And my this is a very like women's sports niche thing, but I don't know if you guys remember early on in the season, there was like a photo that circulated of Laura Stacey scoring and celebrating with Marie-Philippe Poulin. And the caption was something like, she scores a goal and celebrates with her fiance. Some poor guy named Marcus said her fiance was there. I didn't see him. And the response was, her fiance is Marie-Philippe Poulin. She's gay, Marcus. And that like, she's gay, Marcus was their lesbian Stacey of women's hockey. I'm pretty sure there are t-shirts made at this point. And it's like little moments like that. That's what I love about women's sports so much. And so it's like from the big moments to the little things like that have just been amazing to watch.
Yeah. And that kind of begs the next question here of if you put, venues, expansion, all of that aside, to me, the logical next step is you've obviously got
Stockholm, Sweden.
Yeah, Stockholm, Sweden. You've got PWHL Ottawa, PWHL Toronto, right? Like, at what point, and do you think it's this off season, are we going to get into branded names, or are you hearing the scuttlebutt is kind of like, well, they actually like the kind of just regional thing, or are we going to have some monikers and some more swag and branding opportunities and whatnot really be the focus of this off season?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to tell, but like I know at the beginning of the season that was certainly a question that was posed to Jana Heffert a lot every time she was doing interviews, and she, very clearly outlined the fact that they wanted to do it right. They didn't want to do it fast, and the important thing was to get these players on the ice. And I completely understand that. And I'll admit, like, I didn't love the branding at the beginning of just the cities and the jerseys and stuff. I was like, oh, it's so plain, blah, blah, blah. They've grown on me. Like these jerseys are so like, there's something to be said for simplicity in sports branding. So I think there's value in certainly steering into that, but I would imagine they want to get some names. It is a little awkward when you're talking about like a matchup to say PWHL Ottawa versus PWHL Boston. And you can say Ottawa Boston, like, there's a natural way to talk about it. But yeah, I get the sense that just given the North American sports environment, it is something that's expected. They referenced a lot the Premier League and the fact that they don't have names, which is very true. But it is something that North American fans are just used to, and you do want to steer into that market. So I have no insight into like where they are on timing. But I would imagine that it's a priority this offseason. I don't know when their next season's going to start, like if they're going to go to January or if they're going to aim for the fall. So it's hard to say how long their offseason's going to be. But I would imagine it's probably a priority.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just going to pop in there just from an Ottawa perspective. So if Ottawa does decide to brand their team, I think we need to make a list of all the failed team names that have come across the Ottawa sports landscape over the course of history, so they can stay away from all of those, because there's enough of them.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Don't go with Renegades or Rough Riders. Stay away from anything R-based.
Yeah, Rebels as well too. Wasn't that the lacrosse team that went
was a
under as
lacrosse
well
team,
too?
yeah.
R is a bad word or bad letter there, so we need to stay away from that. But I thought I had heard something about like a trademark got filed at some point for the Ottawa Alert, and that was like an old Ottawa women's hockey team way back in, I don't know, the 30s or something like that. So maybe put that on your short list of things that could come to fruition this offseason there.
And I loved that name when that was filed, and we thought we knew all the names of the 6 teams. I loved the Ottawa Alert. I loved that they were all collective nouns, like it was like a singular word. There's something about, I don't know why, but like there's something about the singular word in sports, like the Tampa Bay Lightning or the Minnesota Wild, that I absolutely love.
Yeah.
So I was a big fan of that. Hopefully they go with it, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, shifting from the ice to the hard court. So we're going to go over to the WNBA draft, which obviously just happened this week. Now, Canadian show, we're obviously going to touch a lot on Aaliyah Edwards and, golf clap to her getting drafted 6th overall. But we would be remiss to not at least address the elephant in the room, which was the unbelievable numbers that we just had from March Madness. Call it what you will, the Caitlin Clark effect or whatever. But obviously, this is now translated over to the fact that for the first time ever, which is crazy to think because based on how long the WNBA has actually existed, they actually sold tickets to the draft night. Like, to give you some perspective, it wasn't that long ago that they held the WNBA draft in a Nike store in New York City. So to go from that to being able to actually sell out, and we've got it televised now and all of that good stuff, like, I know 2 of your favorites there in Tarasi and Sue Bird doing the simultaneous cast there for some of the NCAA March Madness games.
It's called a simulcast, Kyle. Get with the times.
Oh, sorry.
Kids say.
Hello, fellow teenagers. But
is this going on the intranet?
You can find this on the interweb. I believe you need to put an AOL CD and then dial up in order to connect.
We're taking jokes from the old front office podcast there. That's good. We're kind of re-engaging that. I love it.
We just lost any listeners below the age of 30.
Don't worry. We lost them long ago, Michaela. It's all good.
But just coming back to the fact that, like, look at the numbers that happen when you actually start investing in women's sports. And there were a few announcements that actually came from the WNBA draft, which are going to have a huge impact and actually open the doors to more players coming forward. Obviously, it got confirmed that in 2025, Golden State is getting an expansion team. 2026 has been floated out there as the next expansion team, as to be determined right now. Now, we saw already the absolute love fest that was WNBA when they came to Toronto for their exhibition game there. Do you see Toronto getting that 2026 WNBA franchise, or is it going to go to another US market that's got maybe a larger population base or something like that before they finally take that venture north of the border?
From your lips. God's ears. For the love of God, please let Toronto be the next expansion team. It was such a shock when they weren't a few months ago when they announced Golden State. And then there was like a moment where Portland was going to get one, but that was walked back. But anyway, it felt all but determined that Toronto was going to get a WNBA team after that preseason game. A nothing preseason game between Chicago and Minnesota sold out Scotiabank Arena in a matter of minutes. Like, clearly the city has an appetite for it. And unfortunately, we now know because of MLSE and their bigwigs, they didn't want to give up Scotiabank Arena for a certain number of games throughout the season. But apparently Larry Tannenbaum has taken it upon himself to bring a team in, thank God. And he's going through his own company and he's working on that. So the last time I checked, that was kind of where things stood. He was looking into it. There was this idea that we would get an announcement as early as May. I don't know if that was an announcement for the fact that it's happening or for the fact that they're pursuing it. But much
they're
like
thinking about it.
Exactly. Yeah. When you never know what they mean by announcement. And Kathy Engelbert, WNBA commissioner, is very good at keeping her cards close to her chest. And I feel like she's been saying the same thing for the last few years of like, we're looking at expansion. We're looking at expansion.
Standard commissioner.
Exactly. Yeah. That's how I know the WNBA has become a legitimate league.
They made it.
They made it. The commissioner doesn't answer questions, and the draft felt like it was going on a little long. No, I'm kidding. But it feels inevitable at this point. I really hope Toronto is on that list. The important thing is that WNBA expansion needs to happen very quickly because you've only got 144 roster spots. We see it every year where shortly after the draft, a lot of the players who are drafted in the first round don't even get spots on their teams because there just isn't enough space. And, we look at this year's draft. Obviously, I highly doubt that's going to be a problem with Caitlin Clark. But if you start seeing the likes of like Aaliyah Edwards or Angel Reese or Cameron Brink not on the starting rosters, that's going to be a huge problem. And then you look ahead to next year where you've got Paige Beckers coming into the league. Like, we need roster spots as more and more like superstars start to come out of college and big name players, super hype players. We need to make sure that they're playing on the opening day. So regardless of where it is, it needs to be a priority for the WNBA. And I'm hoping that we start to see some movement there.
And I heard there's an opening in Stockholm, Sweden too. So
like, do you have stock in like some Swedish venture capital firm or something?
I have no idea what you're talking about. Shop at IKEA.
But it's such a good point though, right? Because like unlike any other sport, like it would be the equivalent of the NFL draft is coming up here, right? And half of those players that get selected in the first round just get cut or released outright. Like, I think there would be riots in the streets, at least in Philadelphia. I know there would be if Howie Roseman made a first round selection and then just went, nah. Cut.
Canadians, you managed to tie in Howie Roseman. We're not talking about Howie. We got plenty of time to do that as the draft approaches. Stick to Canada.
Yeah, but these women that are getting drafted and not getting, the roster spots, it is a problem, right? And I think, we've kind of joked a little bit back and forth here about, Kyle number 2 over there is at one end of the expansion pendulum, and I'm more in the middle. It seems like the WNBA is like not even at the starting line. They haven't showed up to the stadium yet. Like they've just taken such a cautious approach that there probably should have been expansion already. But the fact that, all right, we've got Golden State coming in with an as yet to be named team in 2025, 2026, we'll have another one. But even that feels like it's still lagging behind a little bit in terms of how much talent is now coming out of the collegiate ranks here with, a loaded draft class that just happened. You got another big one coming up as well, too. And then not far down the line, you've got Juju Watkins and her draft class will be coming as well, too. Like these aren't just, okay, well, let's carve out an 8th through 12th spot on the roster for him. Like these are plug and play day one starters. And so you need to be able to work some way to get them integrated into their rosters a little bit quicker than they're currently doing.
Oh, absolutely. You look at the NWSL, for example, in the time that the WNBA has been promising expansion, but not giving anything concrete, the NWSL is expanded by 4 teams by next year, seemingly very easily. They brought in 2 new teams this year. We'll have 2 more teams next year. Like there's a model for this. There is a way to make this happen. And the WNBA and again, like I'm not a sports executive. I don't know exactly what is involved here. I imagine it's more complicated than I think. But this league is growing so much, the sport is growing so much. The WNBA sometimes needs to get out of its own way and allow it. Sometimes I do feel like they hold themselves back quite a bit, and I think by not expanding, they're absolutely doing that. So they need to find a way to make it happen. They need to expand quickly, because the last thing they need is a story this year, and it will happen. But one of the big names that got drafted in the first round is not going to have a roster spot. So we need to get away from that as fast as possible.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering
Yeah.
too, if Kyle, like you brought up a point not that long ago of the WNBA is currently trying to get out of their current broadcasting deal, which is kind of intertwined with the
Yeah.
NBA's right now. And so I'm wondering if this whole wait and see, cautious approach, like once they get that broadcasting deal and you get all this TV money and revenue coming in, like, are we going to see it go from, okay, every year we're adding one, to all of a sudden it's 2027 and we just added 4 teams?
Yeah.
Yeah, personally, I think that has something to do with it. But, to your point, Michaela, there's a lot of moving factors that come to making these big decisions, right? And I think with the history of the WNBA and having not such stable ownership, because I mean, you've seen teams relocate, you've seen teams fold outright. I think that it's been, in recent memory, given the Atlanta franchise and kind of the process that they just went through, I think that this is a situation where they're really starting to just say, okay, let's just wait until we're 100% absolutely no questions asked sure before we move to another location, because we don't want the same thing to happen. You go and you expand to a market where maybe they're not necessarily ready to have a women's basketball team. And then within 2 or 3 years, it's back on the market as either being up for sale or closed down. So I think that that's a big factor as to why. But, you hit the nail on the head with your point. I mean, you got to get out of your own way sometimes. You're your own worst enemy when it comes to being cautious. And when you're overly cautious, you make more mistakes. That's the bottom line. So no one's ever going to fault this commissioner for actually saying, you know what, I'm taking a chance. I'm putting my reputation on the line, and I'm going to be the first commissioner to successfully expand this league to where we want it to be. And then looking back on it 15, 20 years from now, what's the worst that's going to be said of me as an individual? Oh, well, she tried, but she failed. Well, guess what? At least you tried. So I 100% agree. I think that too often in sport, people really look at the methodology of, well, that's not how we do it. That's not how we've done it before. You got to get that out of your system, because if it's in your system, you're never going to succeed. So 100% agree with you. I think that, one, expansion needs to happen sooner rather than later. And two, you need to go to the markets that are crying and dying for these, any type of franchise, whether it be hockey, basketball, baseball, whatever, because there's enough of them out there and there's enough funding behind it that's going to make it successful.
Yeah, it's such a good point. The ownership in particular has always been an issue with the WNBA. It still is, where we see like this very clear divide with teams who have owners who are willing to invest and teams who have owners who use this team as a tax write-off.
Yep.
And the WNBA, unfortunately, caters to the teams on the lower end of the spectrum who don't invest in their teams. We saw there's this huge controversy over the last couple of years about chartered flights. There's certain teams like the New York Liberty and the Las Vegas Aces who have owners who want to invest in their team and want to charter flights for their players to treat them like professionals. But there are other owners who don't want to make that investment. So the WNBA caters to those owners who won't invest. And, it's really frustrating to watch. It's something that I think needs to be rectified, but it's so tough. The other thing on the broadcast side, yeah, that broadcast deal, the WNBA is criminally underpaid in their broadcast deal. We did the math on our show, which is not a strong suit of ours, but we did some math a few weeks ago. We talked about the fact that like the NHL and the WNBA in America have almost identical average viewership numbers. And the NHL makes 10 times what the WNBA makes from their broadcasting deal. So in renegotiating that and hopefully getting it to a level that's more fair for what they're actually worth, hopefully that gives the WNBA that infusion of cash really to go and to invest and make this expansion happen.
Yeah. Well, they just need to get that Toronto expansion, and then Air Canada can be the chartered airline, just like if it was in the PWHL there. Just need a Canadian franchise here, Kathy.
We can do it.
Kyle, Kyle's fishing for an Air Canada sponsorship for this show too, so
Yeah.
he mentions them quite frequently.
Yeah,
Gotta
yeah.
get those Aeroplan points.
Hey, we got to make it down to the Kyle, Texas Kyle Fest that's coming up in a couple of weeks somehow.
Absolutely, I got to get down to the Kyle Fest. You know,
Yeah.
it's going to be a good time.
Yeah. Well, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the homegrown Kingston talent that is Aaliyah Edwards. Obviously, Yukon Husky standout. She was an All-American this year, declared. Some people were wondering, is she going to go back and play another year with Paige or not? Ends up going 6th overall to the Washington Mystics, which is kind of ironic because Stacey Dales, who is also from the similar region in Brockville there, also went to the Washington Mystics 3rd overall several years prior. So a bit of a Canadian connection there. But what kind of, we've spoken already about how rookies in the WNBA really struggle to find minutes of any kind. But what kind of an impact do you see Aaliyah having with Washington in year one? Is it going to be on that lower end of the scale as far as she's a bit of a project? They'll give her some time to get her feet under her. Or do you think that because Washington's kind of been on this up and down trajectory over the last couple of years, that they'll kind of try and give her a prominent role and see what they've got out of her in terms of a prospect from the get-go?
It's funny, of all the places she could have gone, I feel like Washington was the perfect place for her in terms of not just her playing style, but the opportunity that will be available on the Washington Mystics. They're going to be without Elena Deladon this season, which is a huge loss. They've lost a number of players over the last couple of years, whether it be Natasha Cloud or a number of others, that I feel like there's a hole in this roster that Aaliyah Edwards can very easily fill.
Mhm.
I don't want to say quietly, but like over her career with UConn, they dealt with a ton of injuries. Paige Beckers missed a season and a half. They barely had enough players to actually like put together a team for this national tournament. And Aaliyah Edwards has been like steadfast on that team. She always stepped up in those times where they were dealing with injuries. She got a ton of opportunities and she made the most of it. And I feel like she's going to do exactly that in Washington, where they're looking. I don't think they would have taken her if they didn't think that she could do something right away with this team. She couldn't start right away with this team. And again, that missing Elena Deladon is such a huge gap that needs to be filled. And I think that Aaliyah Edwards is in a position where she can do this very quickly. And I'm really, really hoping that ends up being the case.
Yeah. And I mean, you look at the fact that this was a stacked draft class, but B, some more prominent names than Aaliyah in terms of Angel Reese and Alyssa Peely, who were getting a ton of, pre-draft love, ended up going after her. Kind of shows that they clearly think they found something in her, and there's hopefully a role to play right from the get-go. And there's going to be minutes available. So, I really hope that she's able to hit the ground running there. And we've got another Canadian that's in the WNBA that all the little girls north of the border can cheer for, so that when 2026 comes around and Toronto gets an expansion team, maybe she gets moved over there in some sort of expansion draft or something.
Let's go.
We spoke her being a first round pick into existence. We're speaking it now. Future face of the Toronto expansion franchise.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Well, Michaela, we appreciate you hopping on and taking some time to talk all things women's sports. For those that are listening that want to either connect with you on social media or check out any of the projects you're working on, where are the best places to find you these days?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter or X, whatever it's called now, at Schreids, SCHREIDS. You can find me on Instagram too, at Schreids. And you can listen to Vanessa and I talk about women's sports every week on TSN Radio. She's Got Game. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, wherever you prefer to listen. We're there.
I mean, Kyle, we forgot to talk about something today, though. I mean, you're selfish for not bringing it up. I wanted to talk about it. So let's just get it out on the table. Golf clap to Connor McDavid for becoming the 4th player ever to reach 100 assists in an NHL season. I mean, Connor McDavid, if he wasn't already considered the greatest hockey player of today's game, you look at the Mount Rushmore of people he joins as the only players to have 100 assists. Bobby Orr, Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux. You're not going to get too much better than that. So, I mean,
but wasn't it like Gretzky was something ridiculous, like 11 times or something
yeah.
like that?
Oh, yeah. It's stupid the amount of times that he did it. I mean, but we can talk about that again, because I mean, Wayne Gretzky's records, I don't care what sport you play, I don't care where your allegiances lie. Wayne Gretzky's records in the NHL are the most unbreakable records that you're ever going to see in sport. I mean, obviously, Alex Ovechkin's, making a pretty good run at his goal scoring record, but even taking away all the goals that Wayne Gretzky scored, he's still the all-time leader in points.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's but yeah, like, what a hell of an accomplishment for Connor. I mean, he comes back his first game before the playoffs. He had, obviously a couple games where he sat out due to an ankle injury, and he picked up right where he left off. 2 points. Edmonton crushes the Sharks 9-2. Great all-around effort. And I mean, I think, one, it's a great accomplishment, but two, it just kind of solidifies, even when Connor McDavid was out, Edmonton was still fielding a very competitive roster. So, I mean, yes, we give Connor his flowers, golf clap for him, being such a great hockey player, but it's just, it's making me feel nice and rosy on the inside, being an Edmonton Oilers fan going into the playoffs, knowing that they could do what they did without him. And then when he comes back, he just picks up right where he left off.
Yeah. I too one day aspire to be as happy as you are with your favorite hockey club, because my lord, is it ever dark days in the nation's capital. But I mean, like you were saying, I think the Washington Capitals will probably continue to trot out the corpse of Alex Ovechkin into his mid-50s if they need to. So I think there's one record that probably will fall. It might not be pretty when it falls, but it seems like it's going to come down. But even still, like you were saying, more assists than anyone else has ever had points in the league is no small feat. And it would be the equivalent of saying, like, all right, you take away every single 3-pointer that Steph Curry has ever made, he's still the all-time leading scorer. Like, that's literally the equivalent. He's the all-time leading goal scorer. You take away all of those and he's still blowing everyone out of the water. But absolutely elite level company that McDavid has joined there. And it's a little bit shocking when you hear things like, oh, fourth player ever to get 100 assists in a season, and he's probably not going to win the Ross Trophy either. Like, do you remember? I can't remember the exact year. I'll have to pull it up eventually. But Jamie Benn won the scoring title. Yeah, with like what, 87 points?
87 points. Yeah. So they had a list, and I think there were 27 players that would have won the Art Ross Trophy that year.
Yeah. It's absolutely wild how far the game has come offensively, and that's no small feat when you consider the fact that, like, hey, back in the 50s and 60s, it was like Gump Worsley is the goaltender, and he's 5'5" if he's standing on a phone booth. But now you've got these 6'5" goaltenders who are uber specialized with essentially bulletproof equipment on, taking up most of the net. And here we are, we've got, 3 players in McKinnon, Kucherov, and McDavid who are, flirting with 140 to 145 points when all is going to be said and done here.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you can kind of answer your question or statement with one video, so stop, go check this out, and then come back, and then remember, subscribe to the Dine Sports YouTube page. But go watch Connor Bedard warming up.
Yeah.
There's a recent video that just came out of him taking one-timers.
Yeah.
And if you can see, one, the absolute lasers coming off of his stick, and two, the precision that he has, he's putting it in the same spot every single time.
Yeah.
So I just think that the advancement in the skill level obviously has been a thing, advancement in equipment. But I mean, I think that you have a lot of these generational talents that have all these things available to them right now, right? I mean, you put Wayne Gretzky in today's world with his mind for the game, he's gonna excel, gonna succeed in today's game, because he'll have the ability to keep up with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the generational debate. But I mean, I think that when you look at how far the game has come, you look at a lot of those guys back in the 50s and 60s, they're not doing what I just mentioned Connor Bedard's doing. They can't put the puck in the same spot every single time. They were basically just, taking slap shots and hoping it hit the net. And if it did, chances are he's either going to knock the goalie unconscious without a helmet on, or it was going in. right? So
Well, what
you
do you
hear the
mean
old
there's supposed to be a curve in my stick blade here?
I mean, you hear the old story of Bobby Hull, who who was the first one to really popularize the bent blade, and he was like wiring slap shots like 100 miles an hour at these goalies without a helmet.
Yeah.
Like, it's insane. So, it's one of those things that you have to take a lot of pride in as a player, because you're accomplishing things that aren't meant to be done in today's modern NHL, right? But I mean, here's one for you: 100 assists for Connor McDavid, great feat. Austin Matthews is one goal away from 70.
Mm-hmm.
Which one do you think is more impressive in today's NHL?
That's tough.
That's why I asked the question.
Mostly because my bias is kicking in.
I was just gonna say, I could see like a part of you just like, can't say anything positive about Toronto.
Yeah, I mean, my knee-jerk reaction is if you replace the name Austin Matthews with someone else, I would probably say 70 goals. But I mean, both of them, it's potato at this point. Both are really, really impressive records. And you kind of look at some of the statistics that are out there where you've got players like Matthews and Ovi and all that taking hundreds of shots every single year, whereas rewind even 15 years ago, like the NHL leading shot taker would have been like 200 shots on goal, right? So it's just a different game that we're playing in right now, which is, to your point there, why the eras argument is so tough, right? Like, oh yeah, well, Wilt Chamberlain was playing against plumbers and mechanics out there, and that's why he scored 100 points. Okay, right, but he was also eating elbows to the face that went uncalled, let alone ejecting people from games,
getting stuff thrown at him from the stand. Like, there's a lot of factors that we don't take into account, for sure. And I mean, that's really where a lot of these diehards will kind of die on their shield is, well, this, but this. But you understand the full scope of it, right? And I mean, obviously, I posed you that question because I know that you have a little bit of a dislike for the Maple Leafs. So I wanted to see what your honest answer would be, and I'm happy that that you gave yours. But yeah, I mean, I think that when you compare something like that, not enough people really take the time to appreciate both. Not enough people take the time to appreciate the overall scope of it. You just mentioned a guy gets 100 assists in a season, and he's not even going to win the Art Ross Trophy.
No,
like that's insane. You would never think that would be a thing, but that's the state of it. Kucherov is one of the best players in the world, regardless of what you think about Tampa, regardless of what you think about the player. He just plain is. Nathan McKinnon has taken the next step up. If he already wasn't a good enough player, he's now become on that Connor McDavid level, where every night you watch the Colorado Avalanche, Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar are must-watch TV. That's just the state of it. When you get to that point, just enjoy it. Enjoy the game for what it is. We're talking about 2010, with Michaela, and talking about all the great moments from that, from that Olympics. And I mean, you look at, and I'm just talking about the goalies, okay? You look at the goalies that Canada had, with Martin Brodeur and Roberto Luongo. And you go back even further, having a Curtis Joseph, Ed Belfour, like, you're never going to see goalies that good again combined to play for a country other than, our aforementioned Russian potential lineup. But that's just kind of the uniqueness of where we are with sport right now, is that we're seeing these otherworldly performances, but people are just so caught up in saying, yeah, but he did that. Yeah, but he plays with this person. Yeah, but he did it against the Sharks, whatever. Like, just enjoy the great moments for when they happen. And this is going back to even, our talk about Zach Hyman and his 50 goal, season that he had this year. Can we just appreciate that scoring goals is hard? And the
Can't we just have nice things for once?
Yeah, exactly. But we can't. So yeah, I mean, I love the fact that we're seeing 100 assist season. I love the fact we're seeing 3 players over 130 points for the first time in a long time. I love the fact we're seeing on what we could see a 70 goal season that we haven't seen since McGillney and Solani. So yeah, like, let's just enjoy what we've got in front of us right now. And I mean, this is setting up for a hell of a playoffs. And we'll save this for another episode, but Vegas is at it again. So let's just kind of enjoy the records for the other teams as we get them.
Yeah. Vegas is quickly turning into your version of Toronto for me. Eh?
I mean, I respect them, but man, I just every year, and it's like, anyways, we'll get into another.
You're Vince Vaughn at the end of Anchorman. I hate you, Ron Burgundy. But damn it, do I respect you?
Yeah, 100%. You can't not respect them, but it's like it just kind of sticks in your craw a little bit. With it's like, oh, and now all of a sudden he's skating, and like we called this back when the injury happened. It's gonna happen. Oh, but the cap's being circumvented again, and the league's just like, well, we can't do anything about it. Like, yes, you can. You're the league. You set the parameters of the salary cap.
Well, for next episode, Kyle will have his full rant queued up for the Edmonton Oilers. Why we got screwed this year.
I mean, I hear from you weekly talking about how the Senators suck and how they get screwed. So you're allowed to listen to one of my rants.
Yeah, my contributions to the hockey side are coming to an end pretty soon, so it's going to be your ship to run there, buddy.
Love it. But hey, no, that was fun, buddy. Let's do it all again next week.
Why don't we?
Yeah, let's do it.